D.B. Cooper is the name attributed to an unidentified man who hijacked Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 in late November of 1971. During the flight from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington, the hijacker told a flight attendant he was armed with a bomb, demanded $200,000 cash in ransom, and requested 4 parachutes upon landing in Seattle. After releasing the passengers in Seattle, the hijacker instructed the flight crew to refuel the aircraft and begin a second flight to Mexico City, with a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. Approximately 30 minutes after taking off from Seattle, the hijacker opened the aircraft's aft door, deployed the staircase, and jumped into the night over southwestern Washington. The hijacker has never been found or positively identified. In 1980, a small portion of the ransom money was found along the banks of the Columbia River. The discovery of the money renewed public interest in the mystery but yielded no additional information about the hijacker's identity or fate. The remaining money has never been recovered. The hijacker identified himself as Dan Cooper, but a reporter confused his name with another suspect, and the hijacker subsequently became known as D.B. Cooper. For 45 years after the hijacking, the Federal Bureau of Investigation maintained an active investigation and built an extensive case file. However, the FBI has never reached any definitive conclusions. The hijacking remains the only unsolved case of air piracy in the history of commercial aviation. The FBI speculates Cooper did not survive his jump from the airplane, for many reasons. These reasons include inclement weather on the night of the hijacking, Cooper's lack of proper skydiving equipment, the heavily wooded area into which he jumped, his apparent lack of detailed knowledge of his landing area, and the disappearance of the remaining ransom money, suggesting it was never spent. In July of 2016, the FBI officially suspended active investigation of the D.B. Cooper hijacking case, although reporters, enthusiasts, professional investigators, and amateur sleuths continue to pursue numerous theories for Cooper's identity and fate. Cooper's hijacking, and several others in the following year, led rapidly to significant changes for commercial aviation and stricter airport security measures. Metal detectors were installed, baggage inspection became mandatory, and passengers who paid cash for tickets on the day of departure were selected for additional scrutiny. By 1973, aircraft hijacking incidents had decreased, as the new security measures successfully dissuaded would-be hijackers whose only motive was money. The D.B. Cooper hijacking began on Thanksgiving Eve of 1971, when a man carrying a black attaché case approached the flight counter of Northwest Orient Airlines at Portland International Airport. Using cash, the man bought a one-way ticket on Flight 305, a 30-minute trip north to Seattle, Tacoma International Airport. On his ticket, the man listed his name as Dan Cooper. Eyewitnesses described Cooper as a white male in his mid-40s, with dark hair and brown eyes, wearing a black or brown business suit, a white shirt, a thin black tie, a black raincoat, and brown shoes. Carrying a briefcase and a brown paper bag, Cooper boarded Flight 305, a Boeing 727. Cooper took seat 18E in the last row and ordered a drink, a bourbon with 7-Up. With a crew of 6 and 37 passengers aboard, Flight 305 left Portland on schedule at 2:50 p.m. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper handed a note to flight attendant Florence Schaffner, sitting in the jump seat directly behind Cooper. Assuming the note was a lonely businessman's phone number, Schaffner dropped the note unopened into her purse. Cooper then leaned toward her and whispered, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner opened the note. In neat, all-capital letters printed with a felt-tip pen, Cooper had written, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase and want you to sit by me." Schaffner returned the note to Cooper, sat down as he requested, and quietly asked to see the bomb. He opened his briefcase, and she saw 2 rows of 4 red cylinders, which she assumed was dynamite. Attached to the cylinders were a wire and a large, cylindrical battery. Cooper closed the briefcase and told Schaffner his demands. She wrote a note with Cooper's demands, brought it to the cockpit, and informed the flight crew of the situation. Captain William S. Scott directed her to remain in the cockpit for the remainder of the flight and take notes of events as they unfolded. He then contacted Northwest Flight Operations in Minnesota and relayed the hijacker's demands. The demands included $200,000 cash in a knapsack by 5 p.m., 2 front parachutes and 2 back parachutes. By requesting 2 sets of parachutes, Cooper implied that he planned to take a hostage with him, discouraging authorities from supplying non-functional equipment. With Schaffner in the cockpit, flight attendant Tina Mucklow sat next to Cooper to act as a liaison between him and the flight crew in the cockpit. Cooper then made additional demands, which were that upon landing in Seattle, the fuel trucks must meet the plane and all passengers must remain seated while she brought the money aboard. He said he would release the passengers after he had the money. The last items brought aboard would be the 4 parachutes. Captain Scott informed Seattle-Tacoma Airport Air Traffic Control of the situation, who contacted local police and the FBI. The passengers were told their arrival in Seattle would be delayed because of a minor mechanical difficulty. Donald Nyrop, the president of Northwest Orient, authorized payment of the ransom and ordered all employees to cooperate with the hijacker and comply with his demands. For approximately 2 hours, Flight 305 circled Puget Sound to give Seattle police and the FBI sufficient time to assemble Cooper's ransom money and parachutes, and to mobilize emergency personnel. During the flight from Portland to Seattle, Cooper demanded that Mucklow remain by his side at all times. She later said that he appeared familiar with the local terrain. While looking out the window, Cooper remarked, "Looks like Tacoma down there," as the aircraft flew above it. He also correctly noted McChord Air Force Base was only a 20-minute drive from the airport. She later described the hijacker's demeanor as not nervous. Mucklow said that Cooper seemed rather nice and he was not cruel or nasty. FBI agents used several banks in the Seattle area to assemble the ransom. The money, which consisted of 10,000 unmarked $20 bills, most of which had serial numbers beginning with an L, was photographed on microfilm by the FBI. Cooper rejected the military-issue parachutes offered by McChord Air Force Base personnel and demanded 4 civilian parachutes with manually operated ripcords. Seattle police obtained the 2 front parachutes from a local skydiving school and the 2 back parachutes from a local stunt pilot. Around 5:24 p.m., Captain Scott was informed the parachutes had been delivered to the airport and notified Cooper they would be landing soon. At 5:46 p.m., Flight 305 landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. With Cooper's permission, Scott parked the aircraft on a partially lit runway, away from the main terminal. Cooper demanded that only one representative of the airline approach the plane with the parachutes and money, and the only entrance and exit would be through the aircraft's front door via the mobile air stairs. Northwest Orient Seattle Operations Manager, Al Lee, was designated to be the courier. To avoid the possibility that Cooper might mistake Lee's airline uniform for that of a law enforcement officer, he changed into civilian clothes for the task. With the passengers remaining seated, a ground crew attached the mobile staircase. Per Cooper's directive, Mucklow exited the aircraft through the front door and retrieved the ransom money. When she returned, she carried the money bag past the seated passengers to Cooper in the last row. Cooper then agreed to release the passengers. As they debarked, Cooper inspected the money. In an attempt to break the tension, Mucklow jokingly asked Cooper if she could have some of the money. Cooper readily agreed, and handed her a packet of bills, but she immediately returned the money and explained accepting gratuities was against company policy. She said Cooper had tried to tip her and the other 2 flight attendants earlier in the flight with money from his own pocket, but they had each declined, citing the policy. With the passengers safely debarked, only Cooper and the 6 crew members remained on board. In accordance with Cooper's demands, Mucklow made 3 trips outside the aircraft to retrieve the parachutes, which she brought to him in the rear of the plane. While Mucklow brought aboard the parachutes, Schaffner asked Cooper if she could retrieve her purse, which was stored in a compartment behind his seat. Cooper agreed and told her, "I won't bite you." A problem with the refueling process caused a delay, so a second truck and then a third were brought to the aircraft to complete the refueling. During the delay, Mucklow said Cooper complained the money was delivered in a cloth bag instead of a knapsack as he had directed, and he now had to improvise a new way to transport the money. Using a pocket knife, Cooper cut the canopy from one of the reserve parachutes and stuffed some of the money into the empty parachute bag. An FAA official requested a face-to-face meeting with Cooper aboard the aircraft, but Cooper denied the request. Cooper became impatient, saying, "This shouldn't take so long, and let's get this show on the road." He then gave the cockpit crew his flight plan and directives, which was a southeast course toward Mexico City at the minimum airspeed possible without stalling the aircraft. Cooper also specified the landing gear must remain deployed, the wing flaps must be lowered 15 degrees, and the cabin must remain unpressurized. First Officer William J. Radizak informed Cooper that this configuration limited the aircraft's range to about 1,000 miles, so a second refueling would be necessary before entering Mexico. Cooper and the crew discussed options and agreed on Reno, Tahoe International Airport as the refueling stop. Cooper further directed the aircraft to take off with the rear exit door open and its air stair extended. Northwest's home office objected that this was unsafe. Cooper countered saying, "It can be done, do it," but did not argue the point and said he would lower the staircase once they were airborne. He demanded Mucklow remain aboard to assist the operation. Around 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off, with only Cooper, Mucklow, Captain Scott, First Officer Radizak, and Flight Engineer Harold E. Anderson aboard. Two F-106 fighters from McChord Air Force Base and a Lockheed T-33 trainer followed the Boeing 727. All three jets maintained S-flight patterns to stay behind the slower-moving Boeing 727 and out of Cooper's view. After takeoff, Cooper told Mucklow to lower the aft staircase. She told him and the flight crew she feared being sucked out of the aircraft. The flight crew suggested she come to the cockpit and retrieve an emergency rope with which she could tie herself to a seat. Cooper rejected the suggestion, stating he did not want her going up front or the flight crew coming back to the cabin. She continued to express her fear to him and asked him to cut some cord from one of the parachutes to create a safety line for her. He then said that he would lower the stairs himself, instructed her to go to the cockpit, close the curtain partition between the coach and first-class sections, and not return. Before she left, Mucklow begged Cooper to, please take the bomb with you. Cooper responded he would either disarm it or take it with him. As she walked to the cockpit and turned to close the curtain partition, she saw Cooper standing in the aisle tying what appeared to be the money bag around his waist. From takeoff to when Mucklow entered the cockpit, 4 to 5 minutes had elapsed. For the rest of the flight to Reno, Mucklow remained in the cockpit, and was the last person to see Cooper. Around 8 p.m., a cockpit warning light flashed, indicating the aft staircase had been deployed. The pilot used the cabin intercom to ask Cooper if he needed assistance, but Cooper responded with an emphatic no. At approximately 8:13 p.m., the aircraft's tail section suddenly pitched upward, forcing the pilots to trim and return the aircraft to level flight. In his interview with the FBI, co-pilot Bill Radizak said the sudden upward pitch occurred while the flight was near the suburbs north of Portland. At 11:02 p.m., with the aft staircase still deployed, Flight 305 landed at Reno, Tahoe International Airport. FBI agents, state troopers, sheriff's deputies, and Reno police established a perimeter around the aircraft, but fearing the hijacker and the bomb were still aboard, did not approach the plane. Captain Scott searched the cabin, confirmed Cooper was no longer aboard, and after a 30-minute search, an FBI bomb squad declared the cabin safe. In addition to 66 latent fingerprints aboard the airliner, FBI agents recovered Cooper's black clip-on tie clip, and 2 of the 4 parachutes, one of which had been opened and had 3 shroud lines cut from the canopy. FBI agents interviewed eyewitnesses in Portland, Seattle, and Reno, and developed a series of composite sketches. Local police and FBI agents immediately began questioning possible suspects. Acting on the possibility the hijacker may have used his real name, Portland police discovered and interviewed a Portland citizen named D.B. Cooper. The Portland Cooper had a minor police record but was quickly eliminated as a suspect. In his rush to meet a deadline, reporter James Long confused the man with the name used by the hijacker. United Press International Wire Service reporter Clyde Jabin republished Long's error, and as other media sources repeated the error, the hijacker's pseudonym became D.B. Cooper. Due to the number of variables and parameters, precisely defining the area to search was difficult. The jet's airspeed estimates varied, the environmental conditions along the flight path varied with the aircraft's location and altitude, and only Cooper knew how long he stayed in freefall before pulling his ripcord. The Air Force F-106 pilots neither saw anyone jumping from the airliner, nor did their radar detect a deployed parachute. Moreover, a black-clad individual jumping into the moonless night would be difficult to see, especially given the limited visibility, cloud cover, and lack of ground lighting. In early December of 1971, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover approved the use of an Air Force State Route 71 Blackbird to retrace and photograph Flight 305's flight path and attempt to locate the items Cooper carried during his jump. The State Route 71 made 5 flights to retrace Flight 305's route, but due to poor visibility, the photography attempts were unsuccessful. Search efforts focused on Clark and Cowlitz counties, encompassing the terrain immediately south and north of the Lewis River in southwest Washington. FBI agents and sheriff's deputies searched large areas of the heavily wooded terrain on foot and by helicopter. Door-to-door searches of local farmhouses were also carried out. Other search parties ran patrol boats along Lake Merwin and Yale Lake, the reservoir immediately to its east. Neither Cooper nor any of the equipment he presumably carried was found. Using fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters from the Oregon Army National Guard, the FBI coordinated an aerial search along the entire flight path. Although numerous broken treetops and several pieces of plastic and other objects resembling parachute canopies were sighted and investigated, nothing relevant to the hijacking was found. Shortly after the spring thaw in early 1972, teams of FBI agents aided by some 200 soldiers from Fort Lewis, along with United States Air Force personnel, National Guardsmen, and civilian volunteers, conducted another thorough ground search of Clark and Cowlitz counties for 18 days in March, and then another 18 days in April. Electronic Explorations Company, a marine salvage firm, used a submarine to search the 200-foot depths of Lake Merwin. Ultimately, the extensive search and recovery operation uncovered no significant material evidence related to the hijacking. Based on early computer projections produced for the FBI, Cooper's drop zone was first estimated to be between Ariel Dam to the north and the town of Battle Ground, Washington, to the south. In March 1972, the FBI concluded their original calculations were incorrect after a joint investigation with Northwest Orient Airlines and the Air Force determined Cooper probably jumped over the town of Losender, Washington. In 2019, the FBI released a report indicating that about 3 hours after Cooper jumped, a burglary was reported at a small grocery store near Hyson, Washington, an unincorporated community located within the calculated drop zone that Northwest Airlines presented to the FBI. The burglar was noted by the FBI to have taken only survival items such as beef jerky and gloves. Later analysis indicated that the original landing zone estimate was inaccurate. Captain Scott, who was flying the aircraft manually because of Cooper's speed and altitude demands, later determined his flight path was farther east than initially thought. Additional data from a variety of sources indicated the wind direction factored into drop zone calculations had been wrong, possibly by as much as 80 degrees. This and other supplemental data suggested the actual drop zone was south-southeast of the original estimate, in the drainage area of the Washougal River. FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach wrote, "I have to confess, if I were going to look for Cooper, I would head for the Washougal. The Washougal Valley and its surroundings have been searched repeatedly in subsequent years. To date, no discoveries traceable to the hijacking have been reported." Some investigators have speculated that the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens could have destroyed any remaining physical clues. In July of 2016, the FBI announced that the active investigation of the Cooper case was suspended, citing the need to focus investigative resources and manpower on issues of higher and more urgent priority. Local field offices would continue to accept any legitimate physical evidence related specifically to the parachutes or to the ransom money that may emerge in the future. The 66-volume case file compiled over the 45-year course of the investigation would be preserved for historical purposes at FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., and on the FBI website. All of the evidence is open to the public. The crime remains the only unsolved case of air piracy in commercial aviation history. During their forensic search of the aircraft, FBI agents found 4 major pieces of evidence, each with a direct physical link to Cooper: a black clip-on tie, a mother-of-pearl tie clip, a hair from Cooper's headrest, and 8 filter-tipped Raleigh cigarette butts from the armrest ashtray. FBI agents found a black clip-on necktie in C-18E, where Cooper had been seated. Attached to the tie was a gold tie clip with a circular mother-of-pearl setting in the center of the clip. The FBI determined the tie had been sold exclusively at J.C. Penney department stores but was discontinued in 1968. By late 2007, the FBI had built a partial DNA profile from samples found on Cooper's tie in 2001. However, the FBI also acknowledged no evidence linked Cooper to the source of the DNA sample. FBI Special Agent Fred Gutt stated, "The tie had 2 small DNA samples, and 1 large sample. It's difficult to draw firm conclusions from these samples." The FBI also made public a file of previously unreleased evidence, including Cooper's plane ticket, composite sketches, fact sheets, and posted a request for information about Cooper's identification. In March of 2009, a group of citizen sleuths using GPS, satellite imagery, and other technologies unavailable in 1971, began reinvestigating components of the case. Known as the Cooper Research Team, the group included paleontologist Tom Cave from the Burke Museum of Natural History and Culture in Seattle, scientific illustrator Carol Abraxinskas, and metallurgist Alan Stone. Although the group obtained little new information about the buried ransom money or Cooper's landing zone, they found, analyzed, and identified hundreds of organic and metallic particles on Cooper's tie. Using electron microscopy, the group identified Lycopodium spores, the source of which was likely pharmaceutical. The team also found small particles of unalloyed titanium on the tie, along with particles of bismuth, antimony, cerium, strontium sulfide, aluminum, and titanium antimony alloys. The metal and rare earth particles suggested Cooper may have worked for Boeing or another aeronautical engineering firm, at a chemical manufacturing plant, or at a metal fabrication and production facility. FBI agents found 2 hair samples in Cooper's seat, a single strand of limb hair on the seat, and a single strand of brown Caucasian head hair on the headrest. The limb hair was destroyed after the FBI crime laboratory determined the sample lacked enough unique microscopic characteristics to be useful. However, the FBI crime laboratory determined the head hair was suitable for future comparison and preserved the hair on a microscope slide. During their attempts to build Cooper's DNA profile in 2002, the FBI discovered the hair sample had been lost. In the armrest ashtray of C-18E, FBI agents found 8 Raleigh filter-tipped cigarette butts. These were sent to the FBI crime laboratory to search for fingerprints, but investigators were unable to find fingerprints and returned the butts to the Las Vegas field office. In 1998, the FBI sought to extract DNA from the cigarette butts but discovered the butts had been destroyed while in the custody of the Las Vegas field office. In February of 1980, 8-year-old Brian Ingram was vacationing with his family on the Columbia River at a beachfront known as Tina Bar, about 9 miles downstream from Vancouver, Washington, and 20 miles southwest of Ariel. As he raked the sandy riverbank to build a campfire, he uncovered 3 packets of the ransom cash, totaling around $5,800. The bills had disintegrated from lengthy exposure to the elements but were still bundled in rubber bands. FBI technicians confirmed that the money was indeed a portion of the ransom. The discovery launched several new rounds of conjecture and ultimately raised more questions than it answered. Initial statements by investigators and scientific consultants were founded on the assumption the bundled bills washed freely into the Columbia River from one of its many connecting tributaries. An Army Corps of Engineers hydrologist noted the bills had disintegrated in a rounded fashion and were matted together, indicating the bills had been deposited by river action, as opposed to having been deliberately buried. That conclusion, if correct, supported the hypothesis that Cooper had not landed near Lake Merwin nor any tributary of the Lewis River, which feeds into the Columbia well downstream from Tina Bar. It also lent credence to supplemental speculation the drop zone was near the Washougal River, which merges with the Columbia upstream from the discovery site. The free-floating hypothesis presented difficulties. It did not explain the 10 bills missing from one packet, nor was there an explanation for how the 3 packets would have remained together after separating from the rest of the money. Physical evidence was incompatible with geological evidence. Himmelsbach wrote free-floating bundles would have washed up on the bank within a couple of years of the hijacking, otherwise, the rubber bands would have long since deteriorated. Geological evidence suggested the bills arrived at Tina Bar after 1974, the year of a Corps of Engineers dredging operation on that stretch of the river. Geologist Leonard Palmer of Portland State University found 2 distinct layers of sand and sediment between the clay deposited on the riverbank by the dredge and the sand layer in which the bills were buried, indicating that the bills arrived long after dredging had been completed. In late 2020, analysis of diatoms found on the bills suggests the bundles found at Tina Bar were not submerged in the river or buried dry at the time of the hijacking in November of 1971. Only diatoms that bloomed during springtime were found, placing the date range that the money entered the water at least several months after the hijacking. In 1986, after protracted negotiations, the recovered bills were divided equally between Brian Ingram and Northwest Orient's insurer Royal Globe Insurance. The FBI retained 14 examples as evidence. Ingram sold 15 of his bills at auction in 2008 for about $37,000. The Columbia River ransom money remains the only confirmed physical evidence from the hijacking found outside the aircraft. During the hijacking, Cooper demanded and received 2 main chutes and 2 reserve chutes. The 2 reserve chutes came from a local skydiving school and the 2 main chutes were supplied by a local pilot, Norman Hayden. Earl Cossey, the parachute rigger who packed all 4 parachutes brought to Cooper, described the 2 main chutes as emergency bailout chutes as opposed to sporting parachutes that skydivers would use. Cossey further described the main chutes as being like military chutes because they were rigged to open immediately upon the ripcord being pulled and were incapable of being steered. When the plane landed in Reno, FBI agents discovered the 2 parachutes that Cooper left behind, 1 reserve chute and 1 main chute. The reserve chute had been opened and 3 shroud lines had been cut out, but the main chute left behind was still intact. One of the 2 reserve chutes that Cooper was given was an unusable training chute intended to only be used for classroom demonstrations. According to Cossey, the reserve chute had a canopy inside of it that was sewn together so that skydiving students could get the feel of pulling a ripcord on a packed parachute without the canopy actually deploying. This non-functional reserve parachute was not found in the aircraft when it landed in Reno, leading FBI agents to speculate that Cooper was not an experienced parachutist because someone with experience would have realized this reserve chute was a dummy chute. However, within days of the hijacking, it was revealed that neither of the parachute harnesses Cooper was given had the necessary D-rings required to attach reserve parachutes. Although Cooper lacked the ability to attach this dummy chute to his main harness as a reserve parachute, it was not found in the plane, so what he did with it is unknown. Cassie speculated that Cooper removed the sewn-together canopy and used the empty reserve container as an extra money bag. Tina Mucklow's testimony was in line with Cassie's speculation, stating that she recalled Cooper attempting to pack money inside a parachute container. During the first year of the investigation, the FBI used eyewitness testimony from the passengers and flight crew to develop sketches of Cooper. The first sketch, officially titled Composite A, was completed a few days after the hijacking and was released in late November of 1971. According to witnesses, the Composite A sketch, which was jokingly known as Bing Crosby, was not an accurate likeness of Cooper. The Composite A sketch, according to witnesses, showed a young man with a narrow face, and did not resemble Cooper or capture his disinterested look. Flight attendant Florence Schaffner repeatedly told the FBI the Composite A sketch was a very poor likeness of Cooper. After multiple eyewitnesses said Composite A was not an accurate rendering, FBI artists developed a second composite sketch. Completed in late 1972, the second Composite B sketch was intended to be a more accurate depiction of Cooper's age, skin tone, and face shape. Eyewitnesses to whom Composite B was shown said the sketch was more accurate, but the Composite B Cooper looked too angry or nasty. One flight attendant said the Composite B sketch looked like a hoodlum and remembered Cooper as having a more refined appearance. Using the criticisms of Composite B, FBI artists made more adjustments and improvements to the Composite B sketch. In early January of 1973, the FBI finalized revised Composite B, their third sketch of Cooper. Of the new sketch, one flight attendant said revised Composite B was a very close resemblance to the hijacker. Another flight attendant said, the hijacker would be easily recognized from this sketch. In April of 1973, the FBI concluded the revised Composite B sketch was the best likeness of Cooper they could develop and should be considered the definitive sketch of Cooper. Cooper appeared to be familiar with the Seattle area and may have been an Air Force veteran based on testimony that he recognized the city of Tacoma from the air as the jet circled Puget Sound, and his accurate comment to Mucklow that McChord Air Force Base was about 20 minutes driving time from Seattle-Tacoma Airport, a detail most civilians would not know or comment upon. His financial situation was very likely desperate. According to the FBI's retired chief investigator, Ralph Himmelsbach, extortionists and other criminals who steal large amounts of money nearly always do so because they need it urgently, otherwise, the crime is not worth the considerable risk. Alternatively, Cooper may have been a thrill seeker who made the jump just to prove it could be done. In May of 1973, the FBI internally released an 8-page suspect profile. The profile speculated that Cooper was a military-trained parachutist and not a sports skydiver, because, in addition to his apparent comfort level with the military-style parachutes he was provided, his age would have made him an outlier in the sports skydiving community, thereby increasing the likelihood that he would have been quickly recognized by a member of that community. The profile also speculated that Cooper was someone who exercised regularly due to comments by multiple eyewitnesses regarding Cooper's athletic-looking frame despite his age. They also felt he was not a heavy drinker or an alcoholic because the only drink he was served quickly spilled and he never requested another. The profile determined that an alcoholic would have likely been incapable of turning down further alcoholic beverages throughout the stressful and lengthy hijacking. By calculating the number of cigarettes Cooper smoked throughout the hijacking, the FBI believed that he smoked around 1 pack of cigarettes a day. Several of Cooper's mannerisms led the FBI to conclude that he was more intelligent than a common criminal, such as his vocabulary level, his proper use of aviation-related terminology, complete lack of profane language, his calm demeanor, his style of dress, and the respect he showed for the female members of the crew. Cooper's ability to adapt to various situations quickly and competently as they arose indicated to profilers that he was likely the type of person who would commit a crime without the need or desire for an accomplice. Agents theorized that Cooper took his alias from a popular French-language Belgian comic series featuring the fictional hero Dan Cooper, a Royal Canadian Air Force test pilot who took part in numerous heroic adventures including parachuting. Because the Dan Cooper comics were never translated into English, nor imported to the US, they speculated that he had encountered them during a tour of duty in Europe. Based on the evidence and Cooper's tactics, the FBI speculated Cooper carefully planned the hijacking and had detailed specific knowledge of aviation, the local terrain, and the Boeing 727's capabilities. Cooper chose a seat in the last row of the rear cabin for 3 reasons: to observe and respond to any action in front of him, to minimize the possibility of being approached or attacked by someone behind him, and to make himself less conspicuous to the rest of the passengers. To ensure he would not be deliberately supplied with sabotaged equipment, Cooper demanded 4 parachutes to force the assumption he might compel 1 or more hostages to jump with him. FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach noted Cooper's choice of a bomb, instead of other weapons previously used by hijackers, thwarted any multidirectional attempts to rush him. Cooper was also careful to avoid leaving evidence. Before he jumped, he demanded Mucklow return to him all notes either written by him or on his behalf. Mucklow said she used the last match in his paper matchbook to light one of his cigarettes, and when she attempted to dispose of the empty matchbook, he demanded she return it to him. Although he was methodical in his attempts to retrieve evidence, he was unsuccessful. He left his clip-on tie in his seat. Although Cooper was clearly familiar with the Boeing 727's capabilities and confidential features, its design was the primary reason Cooper chose the aircraft. With its aft air stair and the placement of its 3 engines, the Boeing 727 was the only passenger jet from which a parachute jump could be easily made. Cooper also knew the Boeing 727 had single-point fueling, a new feature with which all the fuel tanks could be rapidly filled through a single fuel port, and was familiar with the Boeing 727's typical refueling time. By specifying a 15-degree flap setting, Cooper displayed specific knowledge of aviation tactics. Unlike most commercial jet airliners, the Boeing 727 could remain in slow, low-altitude flight without stalling. Cooper's specific flap setting also allowed him to control the Boeing 727's airspeed and altitude without entering the cockpit, where Cooper could have been overpowered by the 3 pilots. First Officer Bill Radizak, who spoke with Cooper on the intercom during the hijacking, told the FBI he displayed a specific knowledge of flying and aircraft in general. The most significant knowledge Cooper displayed was a feature both secret and unique to the Boeing 727. The aft air stair could be operated during flight, and the single activation switch in the rear of the cabin could not be overridden from the cockpit. Cooper knew how to operate the aft staircase and had clearly planned to use it for his escape. The FBI speculated Cooper knew the Central Intelligence Agency was using Boeing 727s to drop agents and supplies into enemy territory during the Vietnam War. Since no situation on a passenger flight would necessitate such an operation, civilian crews were neither informed the aft air stair could be lowered mid-flight, nor were they aware its operation could not be overridden from the cockpit. Cooper appeared to be familiar with parachutes, although his experience level is unknown. Mucklow said Cooper appeared to be completely familiar with the parachutes which had been furnished to him, and told a journalist, Cooper put on the parachute as though he did so every day. Cooper's familiarity with the military-style parachutes he was given has led to speculation that Cooper was a military parachutist and not a civilian skydiver. Larry Carr, who led the investigative team from 2006 to 2009, does not believe Cooper was a paratrooper. Instead, Carr speculates Cooper had been an Air Force aircraft cargo loader. An aircraft cargo loading assignment would provide him with aviation knowledge and experience. Cargo loaders have basic jump training, wear emergency parachutes, and know how to dispatch items from planes in flight. As a cargo loader, Cooper would be familiar with parachutes, but not necessarily sufficient knowledge to survive the jump he made. From the beginning of their investigation, the FBI was skeptical about Cooper's chances and speculated that he did not survive his jump. The FBI provided several reasons and facts to support their conclusion, including his apparent lack of skydiving experience, his apparent unfamiliarity with parachutes, his lack of proper equipment for his jump and survival, the inclement weather on the night of the hijacking, the wooded terrain into which he jumped, his lack of knowledge of his landing area, and the unused ransom money. Conclusive evidence of Cooper's death has never been found. In the months following the Cooper hijacking, 5 men attempted copycat hijackings, and all 5 survived their parachute escapes. The survival of the copycats, several of whom faced circumstances and conditions similar to Cooper's jump, forced FBI lead case agent Ralph Himmelsbach to reevaluate his opinions and theories regarding Cooper's chances for survival. Himmelsbach cited 3 examples of hijackers who survived jumps in conditions similar to Cooper's escape: Martin McNally, Frederick Hahnman, and Richard LaPointe. Hijacker Martin McNally jumped using only a reserve chute, without protective gear, at night, over Indiana. Unlike Cooper, who appeared to be familiar with parachutes, McNally had to be shown how to put on his parachute. Additionally, McNally's pilot increased the airspeed to 320 knots, nearly twice the airspeed of Flight 305 at the time of Cooper's jump. The increased wind speed caused a violent jump for McNally. The money bag was immediately torn from him, yet he had landed unharmed except for some superficial scratches and bruises. 49-year-old Frederick Hahnman hijacked a Boeing 727 in Pennsylvania and survived after jumping at night into a Honduran jungle. A third copycat, Richard LaPointe, hijacked a Boeing 727 in Nevada. Wearing only trousers, a shirt, and cowboy boots, LaPointe jumped into the freezing January wind over northern Colorado and landed in the snow. In 2008, Himmelsbach admitted he originally thought Cooper had only a 50% chance of survival, but subsequently revised his assessment. Between 1971 and 2016, the FBI processed more than 1,000 suspects, including assorted publicity seekers and deathbed confessors. Theodore Burdett Braden Jr., who died in 2007, was a Special Forces commando during the Vietnam War, a master skydiver, and a convicted felon. He was believed by many within the Special Forces community, both at the time of the hijacking and in subsequent years, to have been Cooper. Born in Ohio, Braden first joined the military at the age of 16 in 1944, serving with the 101st Airborne during World War II. He eventually became one of the military's leading parachutists, often representing the Army in international skydiving tournaments. His military records list him as having made 911 jumps. During the 1960s, Braden was a team leader within a classified commando unit of Green Berets which conducted unconventional warfare operations during the Vietnam War. He also served as a military skydiving instructor, teaching jumping techniques to members of Project Delta. Braden spent 23 months in Vietnam, conducting classified operations within both North and South Vietnam, as well as Laos and Cambodia. In December 1966, Braden deserted his unit in Vietnam and made his way to the Congo to serve as a mercenary, but only served there a brief time before being arrested by CIA agents and taken back to the United States for a court-martial. Despite having committed a capital offense by deserting in wartime, Braden was given an honorable discharge and barred from re-enlisting in the military in exchange for his continued secrecy about classified operations during the Vietnam War. Braden was profiled in the October 1967 issue of Ramparts magazine, wherein he was described by fellow Special Forces veteran and journalist Don Duncan as being someone with a secret death wish who continually places himself in unnecessary danger but always seems to get away with it, specifically referring to Braden's disregard for military skydiving safety regulations. Duncan also claimed that during Braden's time in Vietnam, he was continuously involved in shady deals to make money. Following his military discharge in 1967, the details of Braden's life are largely unknown, but at the time of the hijacking he was a truck driver for Consolidated Freightways, which was headquartered in Vancouver, Washington, just across the Columbia River from Portland and not far from the suspected drop zone of Ariel, Washington. It is also known that at some point in the early 1970s he was investigated by the FBI for stealing $250,000 during a trucking scam he had allegedly devised, but he was never charged for this supposed crime. In 1980, Braden was indicted by a federal grand jury for driving an 18-wheeler full of stolen goods from Arizona to Massachusetts, but it is unknown whether there was a conviction in that case. 2 years later, Braden was arrested in Pennsylvania for driving a stolen vehicle with fictitious plates and for having no driver's license. Braden eventually ended up being sent to federal prison at some point during the late 1980s, serving time in Pennsylvania, but the precise crime is unknown. Despite his ability as a soldier, he was not well liked personally and was described by a family member as the perfect combination of high intelligence and criminality. From his time working covert operations in Vietnam, he likely would have possessed the then classified knowledge about the ability and proper specifications for jumping from a Boeing 727, perhaps having done it himself on classified missions. Physically, Braden's military records list him at 5 feet 8 inches, which is shorter than the height description of at least 5 feet 10 inches given by the 2 flight attendants, but this military measurement would have been taken in his stocking feet and he may have appeared somewhat taller in shoes. However, he possessed a dark complexion from years of outdoor military service, had short dark hair, a medium athletic build, and was 43 years of age at the time of the hijacking, which are features all in line with the descriptions of Cooper. In 2003, Minnesota resident Lyle Christensen watched a television documentary about the Cooper hijacking and became convinced that his late brother Kenneth, who died in 1994, was Cooper. After repeated futile attempts to convince the FBI, he contacted private investigator Skip Porteous in New York City. In 2010, Porteous published a book postulating that Christensen was the hijacker. The following year, an episode of the history series Brad Meltzer's Decoded also summarized the circumstantial evidence linking Christensen to the Cooper case. Christensen enlisted in the Army in 1944 and was trained as a paratrooper. World War II had ended by the time he was deployed in 1945, but he made occasional training jumps while stationed in Japan with occupation forces in the late 1940s. After leaving the Army, he joined Northwest Orient in 1954 as a mechanic in the South Pacific and subsequently became a flight attendant, and then a purser, based in Seattle. Christensen was 45 years old at the time of the hijacking, but he was shorter, thinner, and lighter in complexion than eyewitness descriptions of Cooper. Christensen smoked, as did the hijacker, and displayed a fondness for bourbon, the same drink Cooper had requested. Schaffner told a reporter that photos of Christensen fit her memory of the hijacker's appearance more closely than those of other suspects she had been shown, but could not conclusively identify him. Despite the publicity generated by Porteous's book and the 2011 television documentary, the FBI stands by its position that Christensen cannot be considered a prime suspect. They cite the poor match to eyewitness physical descriptions and a complete absence of direct incriminating evidence. Lynn Doyle Cooper, who died in 1999, who was a leather worker and Korean War veteran, was proposed as a suspect in July of 2011 by his niece, Marla Cooper. As an 8-year-old, she recalled Cooper and another uncle planning something very mischievous, involving the use of expensive walkie-talkies, at her grandmother's house in Sisters, Oregon, about 150 miles southeast of Portland. The next day Flight 305 was hijacked, and though the uncles ostensibly were turkey hunting, Doyle Cooper came home wearing a bloody shirt, the result, he said, of an auto accident. Later, Marla claimed, her parents came to believe that he was the hijacker. She also recalled that her uncle was obsessed with the Canadian comic book hero Dan Cooper and had one of his comic books thumbtacked to his wall, although he was not a skydiver or paratrooper. In August of 2011, New York Magazine published an alternative witness sketch, reportedly based on a description by Flight 305 eyewitness Robert Gregory, depicting horn-rimmed sunglasses, a russet-colored suit jacket with wide lapels, and marcelled hair. The article observed that Doyle Cooper had wavy hair that looked marcelled. The FBI announced that no fingerprints had been found on a guitar strap made by Doyle Cooper. 1 week later, they added that his DNA did not match the partial DNA profile obtained from the hijacker's tie, but acknowledged that there is no certainty that the hijacker was the source of the organic material obtained from the tie. Barbara Dayton, who died in 2002, was a recreational pilot and University of Washington librarian who was named Robert Dayton at birth, served in the U.S. Merchant Marine and then the Army during World War II. After discharge, Dayton worked with explosives in the construction field and aspired to a professional airline career but was unable to obtain a commercial pilot's license. Dayton underwent gender reassignment surgery in 1969 and changed their name to Barbara and is believed to be the first person to undergo this surgery in Washington state. Dayton claimed to have staged the hijacking 2 years later, presenting as a man, in order to get back at the airline industry and the FAA, whose insurmountable rules and conditions had prevented Dayton from becoming an airline pilot. Dayton said that the ransom money was hidden in a cistern near Woodburn, Oregon, a suburban area south of Portland. Dayton eventually recanted the entire story, ostensibly after learning that hijacking charges could still be brought. Dayton also did not match the physical description particularly closely. William Pratt Gossett, who died in 2003, was a Marine Corps, Army, and Army Air Forces veteran who had military service in Korea and Vietnam. His military experience included jump training and wilderness survival. Gossett was known to be obsessed with the Cooper hijacking. According to Galen Cook, a lawyer who has collected information related to Gossett for years, he once showed his sons a key to a Vancouver, British Columbia safe deposit box which, he claimed, contained the long-missing ransom money. The FBI has no direct evidence implicating Gossett and cannot even reliably place him in the Pacific Northwest at the time of the hijacking. There is not one link to the D.B. Cooper case, said Special Agent Carr, other than the statements he made to someone. John Emil List was an accountant and war veteran who murdered his wife, 3 teenage children, and 85-year-old mother in Westfield, New Jersey, 15 days before the Cooper hijacking, withdrew $200,000 from his mother's bank account, and disappeared. He came to the attention of the Cooper task force due to the timing of his disappearance, multiple matches to the hijacker's description, and the reasoning that a fugitive accused of mass murder has nothing to lose. After his capture in 1989, List denied any involvement in the Cooper hijacking and no substantial evidence implicates him. The FBI no longer considers him a suspect and List subsequently died in prison in 2008. Theodore Ernest Mayfield was a Special Forces veteran, pilot, competitive skydiver, and skydiving instructor. He served time in 1994 for negligent homicide after 2 of his students died when their parachutes failed to open and was later found indirectly responsible for 13 additional skydiving deaths due to faulty equipment and training. In 2010, he was sentenced to 3 years probation for piloting a plane for 26 years after losing his pilot's license and rigging certificates. He was suggested repeatedly as a suspect early in the investigation, according to FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach, who knew Mayfield from a prior dispute at a local airport. He was ruled out, based partly on the fact that he called Himmelsbach less than 2 hours after Flight 305 landed in Reno to volunteer advice on standard skydiving practices and possible landing zones, as well as information on local skydivers. Richard McCoy was an Army veteran who served 2 tours of duty in Vietnam, first as a demolition expert and later with the Green Berets as a helicopter pilot. After his military service, he became a warrant officer in the Utah National Guard and an avid recreational skydiver, with aspirations of becoming a Utah State Trooper. In early April of 1972, McCoy staged the best-known of the so-called copycat hijackings. He boarded United Airlines Flight 855 in Denver, Colorado, and, brandishing what later proved to be a paperweight resembling a hand grenade and an unloaded handgun, he demanded 4 parachutes and $500,000 cash. After delivery of the money and parachutes at San Francisco International Airport, McCoy ordered the aircraft back into the sky and bailed out over Provo, Utah, leaving behind his handwritten hijacking instructions and his fingerprints on a magazine he had been reading. He was arrested 2 days later with the ransom cash in his possession and, after trial and conviction, received a 45-year sentence. 2 years later, he escaped from Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary with several accomplices by crashing a garbage truck through the main gate. He was tracked down 3 months later in Virginia Beach and was killed in a shootout with FBI agents. In their 1991 book, D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy, parole officer Bernie Rhodes and former FBI agent Russell Callame asserted that they had identified McCoy as Cooper. They cited obvious similarities in the two hijackings, claims by McCoy's family that the tie and mother-of-pearl tie clip left on the plane belonged to McCoy, and McCoy's own refusal to admit or deny that he was Cooper. A proponent of their claim was the FBI agent who killed McCoy, who said, "When I shot Richard McCoy, I shot D.B. Cooper at the same time." Although there is no reasonable doubt that McCoy committed the Denver hijacking, the FBI does not consider him a suspect in the Cooper case because of mismatches in age and description, as well as a level of skydiving skill well above that thought to be possessed by the hijacker. Also, there is credible evidence that McCoy was in Las Vegas on the day of the Portland hijacking, and at home in Utah the day after, having Thanksgiving dinner with his family. Sheridan Peterson, who died in 2021, served in the Marine Corps during World War II and was later employed as a technical editor at Boeing, based in Seattle. Investigators took an interest in Peterson as a suspect soon after the skyjacking because of his experience as a smoke jumper and love of taking physical risks, as well as his similar appearance and age to Cooper's description. Peterson often teased the media about whether he was really Cooper. Entrepreneur Eric Eulis, who spent years investigating the crime, said he was 98% convinced that Peterson was Cooper, but when pressed by FBI agents, Peterson insisted he was in Nepal at the time of the hijacking. In an episode of History Channel's History's Greatest Mysteries, analysis of DNA found on the tie worn by Cooper indicated that Peterson was not a match for Cooper when compared to a DNA sample from one of Peterson's living daughters. Robert Wesley Rackstraw, who died in 2019, was a retired pilot and ex-convict who served on an Army helicopter crew and other units during the Vietnam War. He came to the attention of the Cooper Task Force in February of 1978 after he was arrested in Iran and deported to the U.S. to face explosives possession and check kiting charges. Several months later, while released on bail, Rackstraw attempted to fake his own death by radioing a false mayday call and telling controllers that he was bailing out of a rented plane over Monterey Bay. Police later arrested him in Fullerton, California, on an additional charge of forging federal pilot certificates. The airplane he claimed to have ditched was found repainted in a nearby hangar. Cooper investigators noted his physical resemblance to Cooper composite sketches, military parachute training, and criminal record, but eliminated him as a suspect in 1979 after no direct evidence of his involvement could be found. In 2016, Rackstraw re-emerged as a suspect in a History Channel program and a book. In September of 2016, Thomas J. Colbert, the author of the book, and attorney Mark Said filed a lawsuit to compel the FBI to release its Cooper case file under the Freedom of Information Act. In 2017, Colbert and a group of volunteer investigators uncovered what they believed to be a decades-old parachute strap at an undisclosed location in the Pacific Northwest. This was followed later in 2017 with a piece of foam, which they suspected was part of Cooper's parachute backpack. In January 2018, Tom and Donna Colbert reported that they had obtained a confession letter originally written in December 1971 containing codes that matched 3 units Rackstraw was a part of while in the Army. One of the Flight 305 flight attendants reportedly did not find any similarities between photos of Rackstraw from the 1970s and her recollection of Cooper's appearance. Rackstraw stated in a 2017 phone interview that he lost his job over the 2016 investigations. "I told everybody I was the hijacker," Rackstraw told Colbert, before explaining the admission was a stunt. Walter Orica, who died in 2014, was a former military paratrooper and intelligence operative. He was proposed as a suspect by his friend Carl Lauren in 2018. In 2008, Rika told Lauren via a recorded phone call that he was the hijacker. Rika gave Lauren permission in a notarized letter to share his story after his death. He also allowed Lauren to tape their phone conversations about the crime over a 6-week period in late 2008. In over 3 hours of recordings, Rika shared details about his version of the hijacking. He also confessed to his niece, Lisa's story. From Rika's description of the terrain on his way to the drop zone, Lauren concluded that he landed near Cleveland Elm, Washington. After Rika described an encounter with a dump truck driver at a roadside cafe after he landed, Lauren located Jeff Ojadax, who was driving his dump truck near CLE Elm the night of the hijacking, and met a stranger at the Tenaway Junction Cafe just outside of town. The man asked Ojadax to give his friend directions to the cafe over the phone, presumably to be picked up, and he complied. Lauren convinced Joe Koenig, a former member of the Michigan State Police, of Rika's guilt. Koenig later published a book on Cooper, titled Getting the Truth, I Am D.B. Cooper. These claims have aroused skepticism. CLE Elm is well north and east of Flight 305's known flight path, more than 150 miles north of the drop zone assumed by most analysts, and even further from Tena Bar, where a portion of the ransom money was found. Rika was a military paratrooper and private skydiver with hundreds of jumps to his credit, in contradiction to the FBI's publicized profile of an amateur skydiver at best. Rika also did not resemble the composite portrait the FBI assembled, which Lauren and Ojadax used to explain why Ojadax's suspicions were not aroused at the time. In response to the allegations against Rika, the FBI said that it would be inappropriate to comment on specific tips provided to them, and that no evidence to date had proved the culpability of any suspect beyond a reasonable doubt. In November of 2018, the Oregonian published an article proposing William J. Smith of Bloomfield, New Jersey, as a suspect. The article was based on research conducted by an Army data analyst who sent his findings to the FBI in mid-2018. Smith, a New Jersey native, was a World War II veteran. After high school, he enlisted in the United States Navy and volunteered for combat aircrew training. After his discharge, he worked for the Lehigh Valley Railroad and was affected by the Penn Central Transportation Company's bankruptcy in 1970, the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history at that time. The article proposed that the loss of his pension created a grudge against the corporate establishment and transportation field, as well as a sudden need for money. Smith was 43 at the time of the hijacking. In his high school yearbook, a list of alumni killed in World War II lists an Ira Daniel Cooper, possibly the source for the hijacker's pseudonym. The analyst claimed that Smith's naval aviation experience would have given him knowledge of planes and parachutes, and his railroad experience would have helped him find railroad tracks and hop on a train to escape the area after landing. According to the analyst, aluminum spiral chips found on the clip-on tie could have come from a locomotive maintenance facility. Smith's information about the Seattle area may have come from his close friend Dan Clare, who was stationed at Fort Lewis during the war. Smith and Clare worked together for Conrail at Newark's Oak Island Yard. Smith retired from that facility as a yardmaster. The article noted that a picture of Smith on the Lehigh Valley Railroad website showed a remarkable resemblance to Cooper FBI sketches. The FBI said that it would be inappropriate to comment on tips related to Smith. Dwayne L. Weber was a World War II Army veteran who served time in at least 6 prisons from 1945 to 1968 for burglary and forgery. He was proposed as a suspect by his widow, based primarily on a deathbed confession. 3 days before he died in 1995, Weber told his wife, "I am Dan Cooper." The name meant nothing to her, she said, but months later, a friend told her of its significance in the hijacking. She went to her local library to research Cooper, found Max Gunther's book, and discovered notations in the margins in her husband's handwriting. Like the hijacker, Weber drank bourbon and chain-smoked. Other circumstantial evidence included a 1979 trip to Seattle and the Columbia River, where his wife remembered him throwing a trash bag just upstream of Tina Bar. Himmelsbach said, "Weber does fit the physical description and does have the criminal background that I have always felt was associated with the case, but he did not believe Weber was Cooper." The FBI eliminated Weber as an active suspect in July 1998 when his fingerprints did not match any of those processed in the hijacked plane and no other direct evidence could be found to implicate him. Later, his DNA also failed to match the samples recovered from Cooper's tie. The D.B. Cooper hijacking has found its way into American popular culture over the years. Characters and situations inspired by Cooper have appeared in the storylines of the television series Prison Break, Justified, The Blacklist, News Radio, Leverage, Journeyman, Renegade, Numbers, 30 Rock, Drunk History, Breaking Bad, and Loki, as well as the 1981 film The Pursuit of D.B. Cooper, the 2004 film Without a Paddle, and a book titled The Vesuvius Prophecy. Currently, an annual convention, known as CooperCon, is held every year in late November in Vancouver, Washington. The event, founded by Cooper researcher Eric Ulis in 2018, is a multi-day gathering of Cooper researchers and enthusiasts.